Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I hope you're all doing well. Thank you very much for being here. I'm delighted to welcome this capacity crowd of students. Do we have any students here? Very good. Faculty and staff, alumni, and very special friends of Stevens Institute of Technology in this second lecture in the Stevens President's Distinguished Lecture Series. If you remember, for those of you who were with us, last fall we held the first lecture in this series with our inaugural speaker, Mr. Norm Augustine, retired chairman and CEO of Lockheed Martin. Norm Augustine was a stellar example of the insightful analysis and astute commentary on the role of science and technology and its complexities and impact on our society. And he delivered a speech exactly like what we had imagined when we were planning this lecture series. With the President's Distinguished Lecture Series, we aim to provide the opportunity for the Stevens community to engage with our nation's most knowledgeable, influential, and compelling thought leaders in the areas of science and technology, progress and policy, and their impact on our society. One could not think of a person better than our speaker today in how he fits the description of the speaker for this particular lecture series, Dr. John Holdren. Before I make a formal introduction of Dr. Holdren, let me just make a comment that I feel very strongly about. I personally feel very fortunate in my personal and professional life in that I've had great friends who have assisted me in more ways than I can describe here today. But this particular event today, this particular speaker today, is here with us because of two dear friends. And I thought the least I could do is to acknowledge their support. First and foremost, Dr. William Destler, who is not with us today. Some of you may know him or may know of him. Bill Destler is a very distinguished and successful Stevens alumnus who was recently awarded a Distinguished Stevens Alumni Award in early April. He was my boss for a period of 23 years in my previous position, and he is a generous donor to Stevens Institute of Technology, and it's because of his generous contribution that we are able to hold our President's Distinguished Lecture Series. So I want to publicly acknowledge the support that we've received from Bill Destler and for the friendship that he has extended to his alma mater. The second person that I wanted to acknowledge is another great friend of mine, somebody that I have known for many, many years, Dr. Steve Fetter, who happens to be with us. Maybe you can raise your hand. Steve drove from College Park, Maryland this morning to attend this event. And the reason I wanted to acknowledge Steve's presence here is that many years ago, I was provost at the University of Maryland, and Steve was dean of the School of Public Policy. And one day he came to me and he said, Nariman, I would like to inform you that I'm thinking of slowly easing myself out of this position because I'm looking at other more interesting opportunities. I said, Steve, what do you have in mind? And he indicated that with the transition in the White House, there is a very good chance that he will be involved with the incoming President's Science Advisor. So sure enough, Steve, my good friend and Dean of Public Policy at that time, joined the President's administration, and he became Assistant Director at Large in the Office of Science and Technology Policy. And it's because of Steve's efforts that we were able to reach Dr. Holdren's office and extend an invitation to him. So I wanted to publicly thank you, Steve. Thank you very much. Let me say a few words about Dr. Holdren. As you can imagine, his resume is extensive and very impressive, but today he will be giving the lecture, not me. So I'll be making the introductory remarks very brief. Dr. Holdren was confirmed as the President's Science and Technology Advisor in March of 2009. Officially, he's Assistant to President Obama for Science and Technology, Director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, and co-chair of the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, known as Pcast. Prior to joining the Obama administration, Dr. Holdren was Heinz Professor of Environmental Policy and Director of the Program on Science, Technology, and Public Policy at Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government. He also served as professor in Harvard's Department of Earth and Planetary Sciences and director of the independent nonprofit Woods Hole Research Center. Dr. Holdren was on the faculty of the University of California, Berkeley, where he co-founded and co-led the interdisciplinary graduate degree program in energy and resources. During the Clinton administration, Dr. Holdren served as a member of Pcast and chaired studies topics such as preventing theft of nuclear materials, disposition of surplus weapon plutonium, the prospects of fusion energy, U.S. energy R&D strategy, and international cooperation on energy technology innovation. Dr. Holdren holds advanced degrees in aerospace engineering and theoretical plasma physics from MIT and Stanford. He's a member of the National Academy of Sciences, the National Academy of Engineering, and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, as well as a foreign member of the Royal Society of London and former president of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. I am privileged and honored to present to you one of the world's most influential voices in science and technology, Dr. John Holdren.
Well, thank you very much, President Farvardin, and thanks to all of you for being here today. I'm going to try to cover a lot of ground. I will talk a little rapidly. I see my friend Steve Fetter down there in the third row. I hadn't realized the degree of his responsibility for my being here today, but thank you, Steve. And if I go a little too fast, we will post this presentation on our website at OSTP, which is listed at the end, and you can go back over it in detail. And I understand it's going to be transcribed and published by the Stevens Institute of Technology as well. So let me proceed. President Obama, at his first inauguration, famously said that he planned on restoring science to its rightful place in his administration. And I want to talk at some length about what he meant by that and what he actually did to fulfill that pledge. And one starts really with the place of science and technology on the national agenda, and with the recognition that science, technology, and indeed innovation are central to meeting virtually all of the key challenges that we face as a nation. The challenges of economic recovery, development, and growth, job creation, challenges of biomedicine and healthcare delivery, the abundant challenges of clean, safe, reliable, and affordable energy, of climate change mitigation and adaptation, competing uses of land and water, the health and productivity of the oceans, of course, national and homeland security. And of course, science and technology are also important because they're so central to what it means to be human. They lift the human spirit through discovery, through invention, and expanded understanding. The President, speaking at the National Academy of Sciences annual meeting just a few months after he was inaugurated, emphasized the point again, saying that science is more essential for our prosperity, our security, our health, our environment, our quality of life than it's ever been before. If you ask what is the place of science in the White House, it's centered in the Office of Science and Technology Policy, one of a number of offices in what is called the Executive Office of the President. Some just say the White House for short. We work particularly closely in OSTP with the Domestic Policy Council, which contains the Office of Energy and Climate Change, with the National Economic Council, which contains the Advanced Manufacturing Czar, if you will, the National Security Council, Council of Economic Advisors. The Council of Environmental Quality is a close partner in many matters, and of course, as you'll learn if you don't already know, the Office of Management and Budget is everybody's partner in every matter in the White House. We have, I like to say, three different dimensions of our responsibility in the Office of Science and Technology Policy. The first is science and technology for policy, which really means we are responsible for providing advice to the President about the science and technology dimensions of every issue that's on his plate, all of the policy issues with which he's concerned, from national security to biodefense to internet policy to healthcare and biomedicine. Whatever it is that he's thinking about, if science and technology play a role, it's our responsibility to make sure he's informed about the scientific and technological dimensions. But the other side of the coin is policy for science and technology. This particular division, by the way, was a construction of one of my mentors, the late Harvey Brooks, who founded the program on science, technology, and public policy at Harvard. Policy for science and technology means, for example, the work we do with the Office of Management and Budget to help the agencies and departments across the government that have science and technology missions to develop their budget proposals and to get the President's proposals to the Congress for those R&D budgets finalized. But it also includes STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and math education and workforce issues. It includes interagency science and technology issues, broadband, open government, scientific integrity, every domain in which policy shapes the environment in which science, technology, and innovation happen inside and outside government. And the third dimension is simply thinking about how the mechanisms by which science and technology policy gets formed can be improved, can be strengthened to make the processes in these first two categories more efficient, more effective. But we have a wide variety of other responsibilities. One is providing White House liaison and oversight for both the National Science Foundation and NASA. Those are big science and technology enterprises that don't sit in a cabinet department, so they report to the White House through us. We carry out a range of functions in support of national security and emergency preparedness communications. We coordinate and oversee all U.S. cooperation in science and technology with other countries, in partnership, of course, with the State Department. The structure through which we carry out this business is indicated here, and I won't go through it all. Primarily, we have 4 divisions: science, technology, environment and energy, and national security and international affairs. We also house the chief technology officer, who, like me in this administration, has the rank of assistant to the president. That means he's a direct report to the president, as I am. We have about 100 staff, which sounds like a lot for a White House office until you think about the scope of the responsibilities, and then it sounds like not nearly enough. And the way we manage to get away with carrying out the responsibilities assigned to us is in part working in partnership with many of those other White House offices I mentioned, working in partnership with the cabinet departments and agencies, and working really in partnership in various ways with the whole science and technology community. One of the great advantages in my job is if I can't find the expertise in my office or elsewhere in government that I need, just about anybody in the science and technology community will take my call and will respond when I say, well, you know, you're the world's leading expert on this particular subject and the president needs to know about it by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Generally, folks will deliver the relevant expertise and on time. We manage in OSTP a number of entities that have different responsibilities within the government. One is the National Science and Technology Council. It consists, as indicated here, of deputy secretaries and undersecretaries of all the cabinet departments that have science and technology missions, plus the heads of the National Science Foundation, the National Institutes of Health, NASA, NOAA, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, the EPA, the U.S. Geological Survey, the Center for Disease Control. And this council is nominally chaired by the president, but he delegates that responsibility to me. It's administered by OSTP. It is responsible for coordinating all the science and technology activities in the government that cross agency boundaries. And to do that, it has 5 standing committees. They're listed here, pretty much paralleling the structure of OSTP itself: science, technology, environment, natural resources and sustainability, national and homeland security, and STEM education. And it has under its oversight a variety of very substantial interagency initiatives. The U.S. Global Change Research Program, 13 agencies, cabinet departments involved, a budget of about $2.5 billion a year. The National Climate Assessment carried out nominally every 4 years under the USGCRP, the National Nanotechnology Initiative, the Networking and Information Technology R&D program, and a number of others. We also jointly manage with the Council on Environmental Quality the National Oceans Council, which is responsible for implementing national policy on the oceans, coasts, and the Great Lakes. We co-chair with the Office of Management and Budget and its Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs and the U.S. Trade Representative something called the Emerging Technologies Interagency Policy Coordinating Committee, very awkward title, and it addresses the intersection of science and regulation around emerging technology issues, particularly information technology, biotechnology, and nanotechnology. I co-chair with the science and technology ministers of the respective countries 6 ministerial-level joint commissions on science and technology cooperation with the countries that are indicated here. We have another 40-some science and technology cooperation agreements with other countries that are managed below the ministerial level, with the State Department in the lead and my office in a supporting role. In these relationships, my office is in the lead and the State Department is in a supporting role. But we are responsible in these commissions for the oversight of all of the joint projects in science and technology, which cover energy, climate change, biomedicine and health, water, oceans, and so on, with all of these countries. I also co-chair with the Russian Minister of Education and Science the Science and Technology Working Group of the U.S.-Russia Presidential Commission. All of these activities are activities that either didn't exist or were in a somewhat dormant state prior to the Obama administration coming into office. One of the president's first instructions to me was we're going to resurrect these activities or create new ones where they don't exist, as in the Emerging Technologies Committee, in order, again, to make sure that science is in its rightful place, doing everything it can to advance the administration's priorities across the domain of national interests, including, of course, international relations. Finally, I co-chair with the Chinese Science and Technology Minister something called the U.S.-China Dialogue on Innovation Policy, which is addressing questions such as the Chinese theft of intellectual property through cyber theft, addressing intellectual property rights more broadly, addressing discriminatory policies around innovation that impair international cooperation in this domain. We also manage in OSTP the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, Pcast. A Pcast, or its equivalent, previously called the President's Science Advisory Committee, has existed under every U.S. president since Eisenhower. The current one has 21 members, 20 of whom, including one of the 2 co-chairs, are part-time, uncompensated special government employees. They're all appointed by the president, but they keep their day jobs and they serve, as indicated, without compensation. The 21st member and the other co-chair is myself, the assistant to the president for science and technology. The function of Pcast is to provide an additional source of high-caliber science and technology advice for the president and to help link the president and OSTP to the wider science and technology community, which, as I've mentioned, are really a crucial resource for our policymaking. Administrative support for Pcast is provided by an executive director and 2 deputies housed within OSTP. These are the members of the first-term Obama Pcast. There'll be a test at the end of the lecture as to how many of these faces you recognize. My co-chair, by the way, I'll give that one away, is Professor Eric Lander, the director of the MIT Harvard Broad Institute on Genomics. What has this group done under Obama? It has been extremely active. This is a list of the studies that the president requested and that Pcast completed in the first term. All of these are posted in full on the website of the Office of Science and Technology Policy, which again I will list at the end. But as you can see, the President has asked for and Pcast has carried out studies of a topic range that matches, in a sense, the range of the policy issues the President has to consider where science and technology play a role. The President enjoys Pcast, as you can see in this photo from a Pcast meeting. It's not that he's that amused by the things that we write, but he really likes working with scientists, and that's one of the things that makes it an enormous pleasure to be the science and technology advisor to this particular president, is he really understands how and why science and technology matter to the national agenda, and he gives his science advisory people a lot of attention. And in fact, he orders that many of our recommendations be implemented. A number of the recommendations that we made in the studies listed 2 slides ago have actually been embodied in presidential initiatives that show up in the budgets the President proposes to Congress. A number of them are listed here. I won't read them to you. The actual list is even longer. But again, it is quite extraordinary and a source of almost instant gratification to his science advisors that we'll present a set of recommendations to the President. He'll have read the written report overnight, and he'll say, we're going to do 5 of the 6 things you recommend. Here's why we're not going to do the 6th. And as for the first 5, he starts issuing the orders to the relevant cabinet secretaries and agency heads. Let's get going on this. He's done a number of other things to restore science to its rightful place, starting with his appointments. It's not widely appreciated, but the President in his first term appointed 5 Nobel laureates in science to presidentially appointed positions, another 25 or more members of the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. He appointed a chief technology officer and a chief information officer for the whole administration for the first time in the history of the U.S. government. He's talked more about how and why science, technology, and innovation matter than any previous president, using the presidential pulpit to explain to the American public why these things matter. He's done more presidential events around science, technology, and innovation than any previous president. We've had 3 White House science fairs bringing together the winners of grade school through high school competitions in science, in math, in engineering, in robotics, to bring their demonstrations, their projects, their poster boards to the White House and interact with the President and be celebrated for their excellence. The President said early on in his administration, if we're going to bring football champions and basketball champions to the White House, we certainly should be bringing science champions to the White House, and he has done it. We had a fabulous astronomy night for kids on the White House lawn, to which the President and First Lady brought their own kids. And we had 300 middle school kids from the Washington area, 16 telescopes, each of which had an astronomer from NASA or the American Museum of Natural History to explain what was being looked at. The President has met with the new U.S. Nobel laureates every year, the winners of the National Medals of Science and of Technology and Innovation, outstanding teachers in science, technology, engineering, and math, mentors, astronauts, visits to government, university, and industry labs. This President has been immersed in science, technology, and innovation. And just a week ago, last Monday, the President spoke again to an annual meeting of the National Academy of Sciences, this on the Academy's 150th anniversary. The Academy was founded in the administration of Abraham Lincoln, chartered by Congress to advise the government on matters of science and technology affecting policy. President Obama is the only president to have addressed an annual meeting of the National Academy of Sciences twice. Let me go on with presidential events. There's astronomy night for kids on the South Lawn, visiting the NIH. The first White House Science Fair in October 2010, dropping by the New York City Science Fair in March 2011. The President said on that occasion, whenever he gets a chance to go to a science fair, he does. We started at the beginning of the administration with something called the American Innovation Strategy as a framework for much else that the administration has done in this domain, starting with investing in the building blocks of innovation, the things listed here: education, leadership in fundamental research, physical infrastructure, and an advanced information technology ecosystem. Second, promoting market-based innovation, including accelerating business innovation with the research and experimentation tax credit, trying to make that permanent, encouraging innovation-based entrepreneurship, a reformed intellectual property rights policy, and promoting innovative, open, and competitive markets, aiming to catalyze breakthroughs for a variety of national priorities, most of which I've already mentioned. And of course, these efforts include increased support for scientists and engineers early in their careers, more engagement of girls and women in STEM fields, commercializing university research, greasing the path from discovery in laboratories and research universities to practical products, and more emphasis on multidisciplinary and high-risk, high-return research. Public-private partnerships have been a big deal for this administration. Firms fund 2/3 of all U.S. R&D. They perform more than 70% of U.S. R&D. I've already noted we've proposed to make the research and experimentation tax credit permanent to encourage the continuation of that kind of contribution. The Recovery Act at the beginning of the administration helped to start and grow clean energy businesses across the country. The Small Business Innovation Research Initiative has provided funding for a lot of different avenues of innovation. The Small Business Lending Bill increased loans and cut taxes for entrepreneurs. The Department of Energy's Energy Innovation Hubs, 6 of them now, link national laboratories, universities, and industry in pursuit of breakthroughs in specific fields related to advancing clean, efficient, reliable energy. President visiting GE Laboratory in 2011. In January of that year, we launched Startup America, aimed at bolstering entrepreneurship by increasing the success rate of high-growth startups. A number of ways we did that. That spawned the nonprofit Startup America Partnership, whose private sector CEOs have raised $1 billion to help startups. The Jobs Act, Jumpstart Our Business Startups Act, spring 2012, allowing crowdfunding, expanding mini public offerings, creating an initial public offering on-ramp. The Wireless Innovation and Infrastructure Initiative, aiming to connect 98% of the population with 4G wireless. Advanced Manufacturing Partnership, a really big deal, again, linking research universities, high-tech companies, the federal government, national labs, investing in emerging technologies to create manufacturing jobs. Part of that, the Robotics Initiative, the Materials Genome Initiative, trying to cut in half the time that it takes to develop and certify new materials. And the National Science Foundation's new Innovation Corps, which is getting scientists out of the lab and starting new companies. Prizes and challenges have been an interesting and expanding way to harness ingenuity across a wider spectrum of the population than is ordinarily engaged in innovation for practical purposes. And the way this works, the sponsors or the organizers of a prize or a challenge set an ambitious goal but do not prescribe the best way to achieve it. And they pay only for results. You only get the prize if you meet the goal. We have a challenge.gov website that provides one-stop shopping for innovators looking for opportunities. There have been something like 250 challenges launched already. An illustration of the leverage of this is a prize that was a joint effort between the Progressive Insurance Company and the Department of Energy called the Automotive X Prize. It offered $10 million in prizes for super fuel-efficient passenger vehicles, that is, those that would get more than 100 miles per gallon of gasoline equivalent. And the offer of $10 million in prizes stimulated over $100 million in investments in research and development by competitors in the competition. The winning designs achieved up to 200 miles per gallon of gasoline equivalent. This is one of the winners. They actually had to build and demonstrate the cars. Quite extraordinary leverage. STEM education. We have been cooperating intensively between the White House, both my office and the Domestic Policy Council, with the Department of Education, NSF, NASA, DOE, DOD, Health and Human Services, and others. We have a number of important goals, moving American kids from the middle to the top of international rankings on science and math tests, and trying to increase the American proportion of college graduates among young people to first in the world again by 2020. We had a $4.4 billion race to the top in the Recovery Act, which included preferences to states whose proposals competing for this money emphasized innovation in STEM education. We started an Educate to Innovate program in November of 2009 to upgrade K through 12 STEM education, and it's gotten over $700 million in private sector and philanthropic support to improve the classroom experience, the curriculum, the ability of teachers, and bringing in practicing scientists, engineers, and mathematicians from universities, national labs, and corporations to come into the classroom, not only to work with the teacher to produce more exciting demonstrations and more hands-on activities for kids around science and math and technology, but also to provide role models so that the kids understand what exciting and interesting careers are out there in the STEM fields. We launched the STEM Master Teacher Corps with $100 million in fiscal 2012, aiming for $1 billion, but we haven't gotten it all because the Congress wouldn't appropriate it in fiscal year 2012. But the aim is to reward and empower our best STEM teachers. And I mentioned the president does a lot of different events honoring folks who excel in the relevant fields. Here he is honoring a lot of the winners of the presidential awards for excellence in science and math teaching. Energy and environment. We had $80 billion for clean and efficient energy in the Recovery Act. Funding for the Advanced Research Projects Agency steadily rising, 6 new energy innovation hubs, as I mentioned. The first ever fuel economy CO2 combined tailpipe standards for light-duty vehicles, new fuel economy standards for trucks coming in, an interagency task force to coordinate the government's work on adaptation to the degree of climate change we don't succeed in avoiding, the reinvigoration of the U.S. Global Change Research Program, a new national oceans policy. The country never had one before. President Obama rolled it out in July 2010, a National Oceans Council to carry it out. There's the president signing the National Oceans Policy Executive Order in July of 2010. Information technology and innovation, big data, a major initiative on managing and manipulating large data sets. US Ignite, an initiative to facilitate high-speed broadband and applications that depend on it. The Presidential Innovation Fellows, this is a program developed by our Chief Technology Officer, Todd Park, bringing in outstanding innovators from the private sector who spend 6 months, some of them now as long as a year, working with colleagues in the government on innovation challenges linked to information technology. Open government, improving pathways on the web for public participation in government and access to government services. And data.gov, making government data sets more widely available in forms that people can use to support innovation and entrepreneurship. This is the data.gov webpage, and I would recommend that anybody interested in the extraordinary fact that 400,000 new data sets have been posted since the beginning of this administration should take a look at this extraordinary website. Now let me talk about NASA. I call this a course correction for NASA. The NASA we inherited had what was called the Constellation Human Exploration Program, which had been announced in the Bush administration, with goals of returning astronauts to the surface of the moon by 2020 and going to Mars sometime unspecified. But the budgets to meet the initial target were not provided. The program was hopelessly behind schedule and over budget at the time we inherited it, and the overruns in the Constellation program were imperiling all of the other NASA missions: science, technology, robotic missions, telescopes, Earth observation, aeronautics. It was a bad situation. It was even worse because the plan at that time was to crash the nearly $100 billion International Space Station into the ocean in 2016 in order to save money to build a rocket whose principal function was to carry astronauts to the International Space Station. This was not a great policy. We rebalanced that policy in extensive negotiation with the Congress. We slimmed down and retargeted Constellation, emphasizing visits to a near-Earth asteroid and to Mars. Developed, encouraged, promoted the use of commercial firms to carry crew and cargo to low Earth orbit, and many of you will have read about the successes of SpaceX, a private firm which has now docked cargo capsules twice with the International Space Station, and Orbital Sciences, another firm which put its first satellite successfully in orbit just a little while ago. We have agreed to extend the operation with our partners, extend the operation of the International Space Station to 2020 or beyond, so we get out of it the science and technological advances of which it's capable, and we've restored support for the neglected and imperiled programs. This is a picture of the SpaceX Corporation's Dragon capsule docking with the International Space Station in May of 2012. This shows the Curiosity Mars Science Lab, a rover the size of an SUV, parachuting toward the Martian surface. The photo was taken from another orbiter of Mars that we had very well positioned to take this picture of Curiosity orbiting down. This is Curiosity on the Martian surface, a self-portrait made by the cameras on the Curiosity rover. Turning to international science and technology cooperation, I've already mentioned the Joint Commission meetings with the 6 countries, China, India, Brazil, Japan, South Korea, Russia, continuing to nurture the strong science and technology cooperation that we've had, convening the Multilateral Economic Forum, the U.S.-China Strategic and Economic Dialogue, and the U.S.-Russia Presidential Commission with a very strong science and technology focus, streamlining the visa procedures that apply to visiting scientists and technologists, and making science and technology the centerpiece of USAID development strategy. Picture of a meeting in China of the China-U.S. Innovation Dialogue that I mentioned before. Budgets, of course, crucial issue. There was a huge boost for science and technology in the Recovery Act, including, by the way, $1 billion for NASA. Science and technology investment goals were put out there, doubling the budgets of 3 basic science agencies, the goal of making the research and experimentation tax credit permanent, the goal of lifting public and private investment in R&D to greater than or equal to 3% of GDP, a level that has not been reached since the height of the space race. And the President's budgets in 2010, 2011, and 2012 would have put us on track to meet those goals. There were setbacks in 2011 and 2012 appropriations because of the spending caps in the Budget Control Act. Despite those setbacks, the science and technology did fare better in 2011 and 2012 than most other sectors did. If we turn to the 2014 budget, and I leave out 2013 because it was a bizarre year that was mainly funded by a continuing resolution at 2012 levels, and so the comparisons in the budget are with the 2012 appropriations. What one sees is that total R&D went up only 1.3%. These are in current dollars, so that's less than anticipated inflation. Anticipated inflation for this period is expected to be 4% between 2012 and 2014. But non-defense R&D went up by 9.2%, or more than 5% faster than inflation. Again, this is the President's proposed 2014 budget. Basic research up 4.5%. Applied research up almost 11% and over 12% in non-defense, and the industrious student can figure out development by subtraction. There'll also be a test on that at the end of the lecture. Some highlights of R&D in the President's 2014 budget, ranked in order of the percentage increase: a big increase at the Department of Homeland Security, big increase at NOAA, providing needed funds for the Earth observing polar orbiting satellites, big increase at the National Institutes of Standards and Technology labs, at DOE, USGS, NSF, U.S. Global Change Research Program, all substantial increases. Not everything went up. It's not the budget we would have wanted in better times, but compared to almost every other sector of government activity, what one sees is the President has stepped up to support science, technology, and innovation, as well as STEM education. Priorities for the second term. What are we going to try to get done? One priority obviously has to continue to be science and technology for the economy. How do we use science and technology-based innovation to advance recovery and job creation, advance manufacturing, new and improved products? Second one has to be, again, biomedicine and health, helping to implement the Affordable Care Act so as to get better outcomes for more Americans at lower costs. Science and technology for energy and climate, advancing the coupled agendas of clean, efficient, reliable, and affordable energy and climate change mitigation, preparedness, and resilience. Science and technology for open government, using information science and technology to improve access to government data and services and to increase participation in government. And STEM education, of course, as I've already mentioned. STEM education to strengthen the next generation, not only of discoverers and innovators, but of workers with the high-tech skills needed for the jobs of the 21st century. And citizens, we need a science-savvy citizenry if we want our democracy to work in an era where more and more of the policy issues before our elected decision makers have science and technology content. There are some important challenges ahead in pursuing these objectives. One, of course, perhaps the biggest challenge, is how we sustain support for science and technology under the kinds of budget cuts that we've been facing. The President has repeatedly been clear that we should not be eating our seed corn by cutting back on R&D and STEM education, but it's tough to do. It's particularly difficult to sustain support for some of the activities of NASA, advanced technology, the James Webb Space Telescope. Difficult to sustain the needed support for activities in NOAA, particularly the polar orbiting satellites. Department of Energy has gotten some big increases, but some fields still don't have as much as they need. The National Science Foundation is coming under attack again. This happens about every decade. Members of Congress page through large numbers of NSF grants looking for titles that seem frivolous, and then try to assert that NSF is wasting the taxpayers' money. There is a movement afoot to require that the NSF director certify in advance that every NSF grant will advance the national interest. That would be all right with me if the national interest were defined to include expanding the frontiers of knowledge, but I think that's not what the members of Congress have in mind. And if they succeed in requiring in advance that you specify what the desired outcome in the national interest is going to be, two things are going to happen. One, you're throwing out the basic research baby with the bathwater. Basic research is precisely research where you don't know where it's going, but in fact, basic research contributes to the expansion of knowledge, which is the basis for all future applied research and development and practical innovations and products. Second thing that will happen is if you demand to know in advance what the beneficial outcomes will be, you'll fund nothing but very low risk, obvious incremental research, and the path-breaking transformative research will not get funded at all. So this is a very bad idea, and we hope we will be able to convince the Congress that it's not a good idea. U.S. Department of Agriculture has been trying to expand its peer-reviewed agricultural science. There's not really been enough money for that. EPA and FDA need more regulatory science. There hasn't been enough money for that. U.S. Global Change Research Program, climate science and sustainability science, that's a hard sell in some parts of the Congress. And international cooperation in science and technology is always a hard sell. There are lots of folks, particularly in the Congress, who believe we shouldn't be cooperating because we'll just give away our competitive advantages in science and technology. They don't understand that science and technology have globalized, that the United States has no monopoly on insights, and that we benefit by cooperating with other countries in a wide variety of science and technology domains. Funding at the National Institutes of Health is generally less contentious. Members of Congress tend to support it, in part because they know that many of the institutes at NIH focus on the diseases that afflict members of Congress. But it is nonetheless hard to increase the NIH budget in percentage terms because it's already so big. The NIH budget is about $31.5 billion. So you ask how much of the flexibility the president has would it take to increase the NIH budget by 5%, and it's a lot. Some other challenges ahead. One is we need to work harder at translating scientific and engineering advances into economic and social benefits, and again, partnerships are a key to that. We need to advance a coherent energy and climate policy that would include increased public and private investments in both climate change mitigation and adaptation. That's going to be hard. We need to address some systemic weaknesses in STEM education. Weak teacher competence overall at the K through 12 levels, and inertia with respect to adopting more effective teaching methods at the college level. Every college professor believes that she or he is an expert in teaching and doesn't have any more to learn about it. And one of the results is we have an awful lot of dull, rote teaching in a pure lecture mode, particularly in the first 2 years of college STEM education, and it drives a lot of students away who get no sense in the first 2 years of the excitement, of the opportunity, of the hands-on engagement with science, engineering, and math. And finally, we have continuing challenges in getting key messages across. Why science and engineering matter to the economy, to health, to environment, to security, and how science works. What are the sources of scientific credibility and authority? And that is enough for me for now. I will be happy to take some questions, but at the bottom of this slide, you can see the OSTP website where you can find more detail on all of these matters, and you can also shortly find this presentation. Thank you very much.
Dr. Holdren, thanks a million for a wonderful, very comprehensive, very fast presentation. We covered a lot, and we now have a few minutes, about 10 to 15 minutes for a Q&A session.
Good.
And with your permission and with yours, I'd like to ask the first question.
Okay, good.
I'd like to get your thoughts on the topic of manufacturing. And in particular, I have two specific questions in that context. As you know, for many decades, we in this country have been outsourcing our manufacturing activities to other parts of the world. And the first part of my question has to do with, I'd like to hear your thoughts with respect to the following issue. As these manufacturing jobs were migrating to other countries, I have heard over the years many arguments that this might actually be all right, because we want to be the country that focuses on developing intellectual property. We want to innovate, we want to place our focus on innovation. If the manufacturing is done in other places because it entails low-paying jobs, it's all right. So the first part of the question is just to hear your thoughts on whether you think this is all right or not. The second part, as I visit manufacturing plants these days, they look very different from the manufacturing plants that I saw 25 years ago. In fact, they're not quite as labor-intensive as they used to be. So the question is, if the rationale for moving manufacturing operations outside was the low labor cost, would that rationale still apply today?
Good questions. Let me start with the question of whether it's okay for U.S. manufacturing jobs to migrate overseas as long as we continue to be the inventors, the innovators, the producers of new intellectual property. I think it's not okay. And we've come to understand a number of things about why it's not okay. Perhaps the most important of these is that when you separate manufacturing and innovation, the feedback process by which actual experience in manufacturing, experience on the factory floor, leads to insights that enable you to improve the process or improve the product, that feedback gets broken. And we suffer in our innovation sector from the absence of actual manufacturing activities on our shores. The second thing that's changing, a couple things that are changing to make it more attractive to bring manufacturing jobs back to the United States, and many companies are figuring this out and doing it. Number one, the labor cost differential is shrinking as other countries become more prosperous and their labor costs rise. Number two, transportation costs are rising. So the costs of bringing goods manufactured elsewhere back to the United States are going up. And thirdly, as long as we exploit the advantage we've always had in the United States, which is being better and faster at innovation than most other countries, we can create manufacturing industries, new products, new services, new jobs that rely on advanced technology. And again, per dollar, the number of jobs associated is smaller than it used to be. But the high-tech jobs associated with running these machines, with programming the robots, will be here. And the positive feedback that generates insights from the manufacturing process that enables us to improve both process and product will be sustained.
Thank you very much. Let's go to the audience now.
I was wondering about your thoughts about whether or not science is becoming politicized. And I was thinking in particular about climate change and the debate that we hear in Congress And if you think this is a genuine problem that science becomes associated with one political party more than the other, and if you think this is a genuine worry, what we should be doing about it?
Number one, it is a problem. Historically, science has been relatively bipartisan. There's been strong bipartisan support for investing in science, technology, and innovation, and in STEM education. There was bipartisan support for the America Competes Act, which largely came out of a National Academy study called Rising Above the Gathering Storm, which laid out the challenges that the United States faces in the domains of maintaining our advantages in science, technology, and innovation. So it's not intrinsically, historically true that science gets politicized. But there have been particular issues in which science plays a major role that have always been more problematic. One of them is evolution and the teaching of evolution in the schools. Another has turned out to be climate change. And I think the way climate change became so politicized actually happened toward the end of the Clinton administration, when the Republican Party was clearly aware that the Democratic candidate for the presidency in 2000 was going to be Al Gore, and they felt that Al Gore had appropriated the climate change issue, that this was Al Gore's issue, and if he was for it and they were going to oppose him in the election, they were going to be against it, and I'm not sure they've ever quite gotten over it. The polls show that depending on exactly how you ask the question, between 60 and 75% of the American public believe that climate change is real, largely caused by human activities, and we need to do something about it. Between 60 and 75%, depending on exactly how you ask the question. That is an enormous amount of public support for almost any policy-related proposition. And yet, in part because the support in the Congress, and particularly in the House, is a much smaller percentage than the public support, we can't get it done in the Congress. Or so far, we have not been able to get done in the Congress a sort of comprehensive approach to this challenge that is required. I remain hopeful, the President remains hopeful, that in part in the face of ever more compelling evidence, including increased frequency of many kinds of extreme weather or weather-related events that are quite persuasively tied to global climate change, that ultimately this will change and the Congress will come on board. But for the moment, it is rather politicized, and it's unfortunate. Yeah.
60 to 75% of the public agrees that climate change is something that we should fight against. When you have something like 99 to 100% of the scientific community agreeing that climate change is real and should be fought against, how do you bring the gap, how do you shrink the gap between what the public believes and what the scientific community believes?
You know, the President has from time to time asked me the same question, and we are working on that. I mean, of course, it's a matter of education and communication. Unfortunately, the folks trying to educate and communicate on that issue have been opposed by a very well-funded, albeit much smaller group that is deliberately trying to muddy the water. And that makes it a particular challenge. Nonetheless, as I've said in response to the President, we will ultimately narrow that gap, and in part it will be because of increasing everyday experience in people's surroundings that they can no longer deny that it's happening. But in the meantime, 60 to 75% should be enough to take political action. And it's not because of an idiosyncrasy in the current composition of the Congress.
I'd like to cover different parts of the audience. Is there a question? Yes, up here.
Yeah, I'm wondering if there's any discussion between science advisors and the President about there being energetic limits to economic growth, like energy constraints in terms of
Okay, I get it now. Energy constraints to economic growth. Are we going to run out of energy in a way that limits the growth of our economy or everybody else's? I'm not supposed to talk about in detail what the President's science advisors and the President discuss specifically, but I will say this, that I do not believe that a shortage of energy per se will limit economic growth in any time period of possible interest to politicians or even to most scientists. The energy resources of the Earth, if you include the enormous amount of sunlight that hits the Earth every day, if you include the enormous production of potential biofuels, if you include all of the fossil fuels, not only the coal, oil, and natural gas, but the oil shales and the methane clathrates, if you include the nuclear fuels, are absolutely enormous. We are going to be limited, long before we're limited by the supply of energy itself, by the capacity of the environment to absorb the impacts of energy mobilization and use. If you will, we're running out of atmosphere faster than we're running out of fossil fuels. And the point, you know, Amory Lovins once made the point that the Stone Age did not end because we ran out of stones, and the oil age will not end because we run out of oil. It will end because we find better ways of meeting our energy needs.
You mentioned earlier in the presentation about some of the departments that were getting a bolster of funding. And at the top of the list was the Department of Homeland Security, which was, I believe the president said, a 186% increase.
Right.
What kind of initiatives go into that? It seemed a lot more.
That is, in a sense, an aberration that comes from building a new biosafety level 4 facility for dealing with potentially very dangerous pathogens that can arise either naturally or as a result of human malice. And so that is not a sort of increase that will be sustained. It's an enormous investment in a big new facility.
I'd like to get your input on how you present to the president. And by that I'm wondering, when you present options to him, let me just take a hot button, climate change. Okay? Does he actually see the other people that sit on your committees that actually hold another position, and they, you know, sort of like a Supreme Court dissenting?
First of all, the president listens to a lot more people than me, and he reads very widely. So the president reads what everybody is writing about climate change, and he reads what the folks who disagree with me are writing. On his Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, which, as I mentioned, has 20 members besides me, there are another 5, roughly, who have substantial expertise in climate change. But none of those disagree on the principal propositions that I've advanced here, namely that climate change is real, largely caused by human activities, doing damage, will do more in the future if we don't fix it, and therefore we should fix it. So when the president meets with his Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, he's not hearing contrary views. But he is aware of the contrary views. Sometimes I write him memos when contrary views get particular attention. For example, there'll be a big op-ed piece in the Wall Street Journal about how it's all nonsense. And I will sometimes write the president a memo explaining why the arguments in the Wall Street Journal are not accepted by the vast majority of scientists who work in this field. But it's not that he's unaware of countervailing views.
It was so comprehensive that my first impression is you left out nothing. However,
you found something.
No, I don't know if I found it, but I was trying to keep up with you. The patent office, and
right.
They call patentable. I don't even have to turn that into a sentence. I think you know what I'm referring to, and I don't know what jurisdiction the White House has versus something else. And secondly, you properly cited Congress as a very, very important partner here. I believe there's only one scientist in all of Congress. He happens to come from New Jersey, Rush Holt.
Yes, a good friend of mine.
That's only one. Does your office have an opportunity to try to educate the Congress? So I got the patent question and educating Congress.
Well, let me do educating Congress first. We are now in the luxurious position of having 2 PhD physicists in Congress. Bill Foster from Illinois is the second. He was elected, then defeated, then elected again. He's only in his second term with one term out in between. Rush has been there for a long time. Some of you who know that Rush represents Princeton, New Jersey, some of his supporters in one of his campaigns had a bumper sticker that said, "My congressman is a rocket scientist." But Rush is a great supporter of science in the Congress. So is Bill Foster. We've lost a few good ones, by the way. We had a few other senior scientists in Congress. Vern Ehlers was one, who unfortunately retired. But yes, we have lots of opportunities to talk with the Congress. I have to testify several times a year before both the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology and before the Senate Committee on Commerce, Justice, and Science. I testify before other committees. I go out and meet individually with senators and members of Congress. I meet with their staff. My staff meets with their staff. We spend a lot of time interacting with Congress and trying to secure their partnership whenever we can. And we get partnership on a lot of issues. We get a lot of partnership on STEM education. We get a lot of partnership on funding for NIH and some partnership on funding for NSF. But it remains a challenge because there are so many issues on which the Congress does not want to go along, and sometimes it seems that they don't want to go along in the spirit that if Obama is for it, they're against it, even if they were for it before. And this is an unfortunate form of paralysis that we're suffering. In terms of the Patent Office, we think we made some progress with the initial round of patent reform that took place in this administration, and that was legislation supported by Congress and signed by the President. But there's still a lot of problems. There's a huge backlog. There are problems with patents that are overgeneral. There are problems with the famous issue of patent trolls, of people who are basically trying to use the patent system as a source of revenue by controlling patents in a way that adds no value but clogs the system. And we are working on a further round of reforms and improvements in the patent system to try to address those, but it's a big challenge.
Dr. Holdren, I want to thank you on behalf of our community for coming here, for giving a very informative and a very comprehensive talk on issues that are of much interest to us and the rest of the society, on topics that are somewhat controversial. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just to express our appreciation, we have a little plaque that we want to give you, and I'd like to read that for you. And then I'm told I should ask you to come here so that we can take a photo together. The plaque reads, presented to Dr. John Holdren in appreciation of your contribution to the President's Distinguished Lecture Series.